Hello students, welcome back. And today we are first going to continue what we were dealing with in the previous lecture, which is use of ethnographic techniques of research method while studying media. We already covered in our previous lecture what is ethnography. We also covered how to use ethnography as a research method while studying media. Thereafter, we looked at the individual techniques of ethnographic research method, and these techniques included vis-a-vis number 1, participation observation, and number 2, interview method, so ethnography interview. Now today in this lecture, we will first finish the next 2 techniques which are used as a part of ethnographic research method. Now, but one of them is indeed a technique and the other one is an additive technique which might or might not be used. So the first one which I'm going to speak about today is called focus group interviews. What is focus group? Focus group are once again qualitative research method, and I emphasize, just like participation observation or interview, focus group is also a qualitative research method. Now, it involves a small group of people discussing on a specific topic or issue in a facilitated group setting. This method is commonly used in market research, product development, and social research to gain insights into people's attitude, belief, and behavior. In this lecture, we will explore the feature, benefit, and limitation of the focus group. Focus group usually involves 6 to 12 participants, though it is wrong to actually define any set number of participants, but it is very important to figure out, or to you as a researcher to at least identify that on what basis are you kind of selecting the participants. Right? So the criteria should be relevant to the research question. You can't just make anybody, just like you can't interview randomly anybody. Similarly, you cannot just call anybody and everybody in a focus group interview. There it has to be some sort of relevance to your research question. So remember, in research, even though I think it has been dealt in the previous lectures, but it's very important in research to have a clear research question. And once you have a clear research question, it's also important for you to have a clear hypothesis, right? What is the possible answer? And thereafter, you do a research, just like in science, right? Once you have a question and you have a possible answer, you figure out what you are thinking is right or wrong. Right? And in science, usually the experimental method is very common. Even in social science, there can be experiments. But here, when you're using an ethnographic techniques, you are interviewing people. You're doing focus group and trying to analyze that whatever you have kind of, the hypothesis you have in your mind is correct or incorrect. So the focus group session is usually recorded, either in audio and video. But again, this is not an absolutely mandate, but it's a common practice. Now, what are the benefits of focus group interview? Once again, it kind of gives you an in-depth idea onto what you're researching on, right? The group dynamics and interactions become very clear. Right. So, for example, in my previous lecture, I was giving example of that I kind of came across a research where the research was on the urban house help. Right? Now, what about if you kind of have a select few of these urban house help, and then you have a select few of the house owners, and then make them sit in the same setting, right, and ask them questions. So you will see that the dynamics between these two groups, who are very, very contrasting to each other, will reveal insights and perspective which might not be visible, which you might not come across in a one-to-one interview when you are separately interviewing the house helps and when you are separately interviewing the house owner. So focus group allows researchers to collect data from multiple participants in a relevantly short period of time. However, as with any other technique, of course, focus group has its limitation, and of course, the limitation includes sometimes you will get incomplete data, a facilitator. So, of course, if it's a group discussion, there will be a facilitator, and this facilitator plays a very important role, right? And if the facilitator, and in most scenarios, the facilitator is actually the researcher. But if the researcher or the facilitator, whoever you have chosen for the group discussion, is any way biased, right? So for example, take the example of the house help and the house owners. Now, if for whatsoever reason, if the facilitator is biased towards one particular community or one particular group, right, in the group dynamics, of course the result will be absolutely flawed. The discussion will be very, very flawed in every sense of it. So participants may also be influenced by the presence of other participants, right? So in this setting, maybe the house helps will not speak so fluently as they would have in a 101 setting, right? So that's also a problem with the focus group discussions. Sometimes the other groups might be, if your research has anything to do with education, say you put teachers and students together in a focus group interview, right? Or if it's all about students only, from say students of class 10 and students of class 8, often these dynamics do not work very well, and as a result the respondent might not be as vocal as they would have in with any other technique. And lastly, the focus group may not be suitable for all research questions. Please be clear about that none of the techniques is actually, you have to, that's why there's a term called research strategy, right? So you will have to find what strategy works best for your research. Of course, when you're doing a focus group as well, you have to take certain consideration. Number one consideration will be the participant selection. Whom are you selecting as your participants? Next is the sample size. Again, I mentioned 6 to 12, but that's like the minimum. So what should be the correct sample size, right? Who will facilitate the group discussion? Very important. That facilitator should not be biased, right? That facilitator should have skills, communication skills, right? And that facilitator has to be non-judgmental. The facilitator has also to guide discussions in a certain way. So that's actually a skill. You also have to take into account the location and the logistics, right? And finally, you have to, have a sort of report, right? You have to analyze the data which you have gathered in these focus group discussions. So here is a small kind of video clip, which is not exactly a focus group discussion, but more or less something similar to it. So I would want you students to please have a look before we go on to our first quiz for this lecture.
So what we have to do is tell them that to learn things, in a lot of scenarios, they have to go to some place. They have educational trips, they have excursions. What we will try to do is, we will try to bring the place to them, and we have to, what our work is to try to show them something completely different to answer some very common questions people have these days. So even though they are studying a lot of things in environmental science, they might not really know, like it might just be what they are learning from the book, but they might not know the real applications, or maybe they have been never induced to ask more questions or delve deeper into the issues. So this presentation, through whatever we're going to do tomorrow, is we'll give them questionnaire which will give us one insight into how they are going through their textbooks, another as to how curious they are when you give live interactions you're having. You tell them something and what are the questions they raise immediately.
Hello students, welcome back, and let's begin with the first quiz. So the first quiz is, what is a focus group interview? I'm giving you 4 options. Number 1, a one-on-one interview with the participant. So a one-on-one interview, an interview conducted with a large group of participants, right? It's an ordinary survey, or it's a participation observation. Of course, you know the right answer, that a focus group interview is an interview conducted with a large group of participants. So this brings me to the last technique, which is survey. Please remember that survey is not directly related to ethnography. Right? Now, surveys can be also of several kinds. There can be open-ended questions, which are qualitative in nature, and it can be also quantitative. So survey is something which can be used as an added technique along with other other ethnographic techniques. But it's often not advised that if you're doing a research and you have only survey as a technique and you cannot name it as ethnography, right? So ethnographic, when you say that I've conducted an ethnography research, which means that you have to substantiate the research with other more qualitative methods, right? Such as focus groups, such as question answer, such as participation observation. So ethnography means that you have to even if you do a survey, right, even if you do have a qualitative or a quantitative survey, it needs to be substantiated with these other kind of ethnographic techniques, right? So please keep that in mind. So some researcher may use a combination of ethnography and survey. I don't call survey directly a part of ethnography. I am repeatedly saying that, right? And because the such a combination is actually used in many cases, it's called an ethnographic survey. This approach involves using survey methods to collect quantitative data on a large sample of participation, and sometimes qualitative as well, while also incorporating ethnographic methods to gain a deeper understanding of the cultural and the social context. So survey should always be used in addition to the other ethnographic methods, right? So please remember that. On that note, we go to our next topic. So now that we are completely aware, students, that what do you mean by ethnography? How can you implement ethnography as a method onto studying media, researching media? And now that we know individually what are the various techniques which are used while doing ethnographic research, and we had some examples also from how you use ethnography in the context of media. We are now going into a particular kind of, actually two kinds of ethnographic research which has surfaced recently, and one of them is video ethnography, and the second one is virtual ethnography. So students, video ethnography is using technology with ethnography. So it's a combination of technology and ethnography. I'm reading a little bit for you. It involves the use of video cameras to record the daily activities and interactions of a particular group or community, with the aim of gaining a deeper understanding of the social and cultural practices. Video ethnography has become increasingly very popular research method in recent years, particularly in the fields of anthropology, sociology, and particularly media studies. This representation will provide an overview of what video ethnography is, how it works, its advantage, limitations, and its use of media research. Now, before I go any further, students, I know the question which is coming to your mind that it's fantastic, right? This is almost like filmmaking combined with ethnography. I know so many students who actively document their participation observation, who actively document their research process, or document their kind of, interviews, right? All of the interviews they are taking. In fact, there are scholars like Haryant Gill who make ethnographic documentaries, and they have written extensively on ethnographic documentary. So this is like a combination of documentary, filmmaking, and ethnography, right? In fact, there's a course also which I have offered previously called Video Ethnography, which is a course in entirety about video ethnography, which also teaches you about the filmmaking techniques, right, which you can use. Now, the question which I'm sure you're thinking in your mind, and I want to address it right in the beginning, is that how do you, how are you equipped technologically as social science researcher to use filmmaking as a tool to kind of incorporate in your research? So my dear students, the answer to this is that you don't need to actually have very high-end cameras or very high-end sound equipments or editing in order to practice video ethnography, right? In fact, it's not even advisable. Think about you're carrying this large camera and then you're going as a participant observer. You will disturb everyone, right? And no one will allow you that. because you remember, ethnography means that you are intruding somebody's natural setting. And this natural setting might be of this rural kind of community, or it be a film set. You can't intrude with a big camera everywhere. So that's not the idea. Also, the idea, and in fact, video ethnography as a practice has come into surface because of the available digital technologies today. So you can actually shoot with your cell phone, right? You shoot with your cell phone, you edit with several freely available editing softwares which are now available, such as OpenShot and so on. They're very easy to learn. There are so many YouTube videos with which you can learn editing in OpenShot, right? Or how to shoot with your cell phone. These are very, very simple things to learn. And or to use how to record sound audio with your cell phone, right? So you can use these simple day-to-day gadgets which we use in our everyday life and create magic, which is create material which on one hand you can say them as documentaries, because in a lot of ways it's inclined towards documentary, but on the other end you can also say that it's video ethnography. It's basically you have documented your research. So ideally it's documentation of your research, but many people actually document it very, very creatively, and I'll show you some examples. But before that, let's talk about how does video ethnography work. Number one is recording your video footage. Video ethnography involves use of video cameras or cell phones, whatever you use as your video camera, to record the daily activity and interactions of a particular group or community. The recording can be done using stationary cameras, body-worn cameras, mobile cameras, and the video footage captures the behavior and interaction of the group. So be it interview, be it focus group, be it participation, observation, you basically record whatever you are seeing. Next is analyzing the video footage. It's not enough to just record, right? You have to analyze what is being recorded. So the researcher actually tries to identify patterns and themes and provide insights about the group and the community which you're trying to study. And of course, this involves one of the most important tenets, is transcribing. You transcribe the audio. What is transcribing? Transcribe is simply converting the oral words into written words, right? So you transcribe, and then you look for themes and you look for patterns in the data which you have gathered, right? And based on those patterns and themes, you derive inferences from what you have seen. So and then it's not just enough to again analyze, you have to also interpret those findings. And remember, this interpretation, you have to connect it to the hypothesis, right? So you have a research question, you have a hypothesis, you have a possible yes or no answer, or you have a possible answer to whatever question you have. And then you see that, whatever data you have gathered, is it matching it to the same, or is it leading you to a new direction of research altogether? Is it talking about something else, right? So often as researchers, we try to do 2 plus 2, which is basically that I have a hypothesis in mind and I try and collate those data which fits well into my hypothesis. But remember, that's not the idea. This is where you have to make the bias as limited as possible. And finally, of course, the presentation of the finding, right? So the last 2 or 3 is actually applicable to all research, but then it's also applicable to video ethnography. Now, what is the advantage of video ethnography? Why pursue video ethnography? It's rich and detailed data. It's a documented data. Just imagine, like you have taken, say you're doing participation observation, or you're doing interviews, and you've kind of written down everything, right? And you have an audio recording, or you have an audio video recording. Of course, the audio video recording will be, which will be much more helpful or fruitful later on, right? Also, it's if you can make it, it can be invasive and non-invasive. But then there can be non-invasive methods, particularly if you're using say data which is acquired through those non-interfering cameras and so on. It's flexibility, right? Flexibility is one of the most important thing in terms of length of recording, location, etc. Right? It gives you sometimes access to hard to reach group, right? That's also very important. Cross-cultural comparison and visualization of the data, some of the examples how video ethnography works well. Now, before we go further, I would like to ask a quiz to you, go back to our quizzes. And here is my quiz. What are some advantages of video ethnography? Number one, is its non-invasive observation or of behavior. Number two, it's access to hard-to-reach groups. So in many cases, it's non-invasive. Not in all cases, but in most cases. It's hard to access, you can reach out to hard to access reach groups. It provides you rich and detailed data. And the fourth answer, it's all the above. Of course, as we just discussed before this quiz, that these are all advantages of video ethnography. Yes, students. So now we discuss some of the disadvantage. And I'm sure you're already thinking in those terms. One of the biggest disadvantage is that it has certain technological imperatives, which means that you need to have some idea of technology. Of course, it's not enough to say that I'll just use my cell phone, or I'll just use my cell phone again to record an audio. You need to have some sort of understanding of the technology, particularly the editing part of it, even though it may sound like it's the easiest thing in the world, but nonetheless, of course, you will have to learn certain tricks, and you'll have to take time and devote time. The researcher has to devote time in order to understand and work with technology. So this is one of the biggest disadvantage. And the second disadvantage actually is that sometimes it does become intrusive, right? So of course, even if you're using a small camera, right, which is in most cases non-intrusive, but the moment you're going around with the camera, the moment people know, your subjects know that they are being shot, they have a tendency to get reserved, right? I think a person speaks much more fluently when you're just writing their words, but when you're kind of recording them, right, it's your subject might become very, very conscious. So this is very problematic. Second, ethical consideration again becomes very much important in terms of in case of video ethnography, right? The confidentiality and the issue of privacy and consent, which were of course important with any of the video ethnography, with any of the other ethnographic techniques. But in video ethnography, it becomes very, very pertinent, right? It's indeed time consuming, it's resource intensive. You need to have a camera, you need to have recording devices. The more high end you go, right, the more it becomes resource incentive. There has to be transcribing of the data. Of course, AI has come to your aid, and there are wonderful softwares which kind of transcribe the audio, but nonetheless, there is effort and time which has to be devoted to transcribing. There is, of course, subjectivity. The way you shoot the visual data sometimes lends to the meaning, right? So that is the subjectivity kind of which video ethnography brings along with itself. So that needs to be eliminated, right? There is sometimes a bias, as with any other research. The researcher conducting video ethnography may have biases with in terms of interpretation and so on. And sometimes video ethnography gives you an incomplete picture as well. So in order to explain you video ethnography a little better, I'm going to show you now a person's personal website. And his name is Harjanth Gill. And I have been following him for a while. And interestingly, he's an academician. He's a film scholar, as you can see. He's a media scholar, as you can see. But what he does is he also calls himself a documentary filmmaker, but the nature of his films is very much ethnographic documentary. So if you type his name in Google, you will find that Harjanth Gill has actually written, and I'm going to his Google Scholar page, and you will find that many of his writing are actually about, he has kind of intertwined, right? Look at this paper, ethnographic documentary production, right? And I'm just reading the description a little bit. The term documentary production within anthropology characterizes the making and circulation of ethnographic research and scholarship, which includes film and video as a primary medium of storytelling and communicating cultural exchange. These categories evolve frequently. And what constitutes a film as ethnographic cinema, which is, if you're aware, when you talk about documentary films, ethnography is actually a category of documentary films, right? So there are ethnographic films, which are documentaries. So it's but obvious that we will connect ethnographic films to ethnographic research, right? I'm just coming to that. So for example, and going back to his writing, in the Oxford Bibliographies in Anthropology entry, ethnographic film there's provided an overview of some of the debates in attempting to narrow down the theoretical framework and parameters of filmic ethnography. So this is a very interesting paper, and in fact Harjant Gill repeatedly writes about the ethnographic documentary production, trying to find a connect between ethnographic research and ethnographic documentaries. Now also, if you go to his website and if you go to the films, then you understand, these are on one hand, these are ethnographic documentary films, but on the other hand, these films are also research documents, right? This is also a documentation of his research, right? And this will take time for you to watch the film and read the documentary. So please just Google his name, and I'm sure you can land up his website, which will give you a lot of details on video ethnography, and you can see some of his work as well. On that note, we will kind of finish this lecture, and I will go on to the last quiz for you, and I will catch you again in the forthcoming lecture, which will be a continuation of this lecture where we talk about the other kind of ethnographic methods, video ethnography or virtual ethnography, and so on. So students, here is my final question for you for this lecture. Who is Harjant Gill? Is he a musician? Is he a painter, a documentary filmmaker and researcher, and or a cinematographer? The answer, of course, that he's a documentary filmmaker and researcher, right? Particularly working in the field of ethnography. Thank you. See you in the next lecture.